We welcome Dr. Edna Greene Medford.
Years in proved to be a bittersweet time for many enslaved African Americans who labored in the antebellum South. While it ushered in the Christmas season with its more relaxed work regimen and momentary privileges, it also signaled the approach of a new year that assuredly would be characterized by the separation of families. Harriet Jacobs, an enslaved mother of two, observed that, were it not that hiring day is near at hand, and many families are fearfully looking forward to the probability of separation in a few days, Christmas might be a happy season for the poor slave. Hiring day took place on the 1st of January, when owners who did not need the labor of all of their slaves hired them out to distant neighbors and others who found it more economical to rent than to buy enslaved people. Husbands and fathers were denied the companionship and affection of wives and children. When families could not expect the protection and support of men who were themselves severely constrained in their relations with slave owners. Such practices challenge the Black family and illustrate its vulnerability in the face of actions taken by those who dare to identify a human being as property. Separation, either through hiring out or by sale, was but one of the many inhumanities suffered by nearly 4 million enslaved Black men, women, and children at the beginning of the Civil War. Uncompensated labor, intimidation, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, and denial of the basic rights of humanity kept them praying for deliverance. Those prayers intensified after April 12, 1861, when South Carolina, the first of the slaveholding states to cast off the national government and attempt to go its own way, launched an attack on a federal installation in Charleston Harbor. In the 4 years of war that followed, federal policy in the form of actions by the President and Congress eroded the South's prized domestic institution by promising freedom to the enslaved. Prior to that, Black men and women had begun their own campaign against slavery by taking flight. Once allowed to do so, Black men assisted materially in the cause of union and liberty. Initially by serving as non-combatant military laborers, and after January 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation officially authorized it, as soldiers in arms. Before the war had ended, nearly 200,000 would see service in the Union Army and Navy. Black women did their part as well, serving as nurses, laundresses, and spies. Even those who chose to remain in the Confederacy or could not escape helped to destroy the institution from within. As the war neared an end, concern arose over the constitutionality of the Emancipation Proclamation. As a military measure, would it be sustainable once victory was declared? Not everyone agreed that it would be. Nor had the proclamation promised freedom to those African Americans enslaved in the states that had not joined their southern sisters in secession. Approximately 830,000 residents of Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri had remained unaffected by the proclamation's stipulations. Two of the states, Maryland and Missouri, would implement its own emancipation before war's end. Delaware and Kentucky failed to follow, despite presidential coaxing and the friction and abrasion of war, as Lincoln put it. How to effect emancipation in the rest of the nation and ensure that the institution would be prohibited forever would generate intense debate. The political climate and public sentiment encouraged support for a constitutional amendment as wartime casualties mounted. Convinced that the divisiveness caused by slavery's continued presence was too dear a cost, Northern residents sent petitions to Congress urging irrevocable universal emancipation as the solution to preserving the Union and ridding the nation of the potential for such future disagreements. Even in the slaveholding border states, growing anti-slavery sentiment straightened the backs of Democratic representatives who heretofore had bowed to the slave power. In early 1863, the Senate and House of Representatives debated the issue of a constitutional amendment to end slavery. Acknowledging the injustice of the institution, the Illinois Senator Lyman Trumbull urged that in passing the bill, we restore to a whole race that freedom which is theirs by the gift of God, but which we for generations have wickedly denied them. When the Senate voted on April 8th, those in favor of the amendment carried the day by 38-6. No such victory prevailed in the House of Representatives. The bill met defeat by a vote of 93-65. When the representatives revisited the amendment a few months later, its opponents charged that if passed, it would confer equality on the free people. When the war is done for freeing the Negroes, one observed, the war is to go on to give them the vote and a seat in the jury box. Few could deny that this fear was justified. African Americans had seized the opportunity through the war to press for those rights enjoyed by other Americans: the right to vote, to serve on juries, to enjoy equal access to the public conveyances and accommodations. Frederick Douglass and other Black leaders had already declared that once Black men were enrolled in the defense of the nation, they could not be denied in their demand for full citizenship. After impassioned speeches on both sides, a great deal of political maneuvering on the part of the Republican House leadership, and the intervention of the president, who used his influence to secure critical votes, the bill passed through the House on January 31st, 1865, by barely a 2/3 majority. Its provisions, outlined in 2 sections, were simple but transformational. Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2, Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. Although not required to do so, Lincoln signed it before sending it on to the states for ratification. The ratification process reflected the concerns and influences prevailing in each of the states. As the home state of Lincoln, Illinois pressed to be the first to ratify the amendment, doing so on February 1st, the same day the president sent it forward. Before the end of February, 18 states had approved ratification, including 2 of the slave-holding border states, as well as 2 states that had been members of the Confederacy, but were undergoing reconstruction through federal intervention. After the war ended, momentum slowed, and the requisite 3/4 majority was not met until Georgia cast its vote on December 6th. 9 states voted ratification after it had been adopted, including 4 that had initially rejected it. They included New Jersey, which ratified it in January 1865, and Delaware, which did so in 1901. Kentucky, defiant for over a century, finally voted ratification in 1976. Mississippi has the dubious distinction of not ratifying until 1995 and not having that ratification officially registered until 2013.